The band teacher put 2 fingers to her lips and whistled a whistle that cut through committees. "Water break," she said, "because heroes are practical." Kids flooded the aisles. Noise of the right kind filled the room. Unscripted, human, drippy, unison only by accident. The pains dissolved into air the way money disappears into the place it came from when a froth ends. Walter watched me. He didn't approach. Field anthropology did. She stood by the bleacher and said, "That was very rude ethnography." "It's the only polite thing I had left," I said. "We didn't cause that," she said, gesturing at the grid that had been and now wasn't. "I know," I said. "That's what scares me." She didn't argue. After, in the parking lot, parents buckled children into compliance, and the winter air tried to ruin 1,000 tuxedo shirts and concert dresses borrowed from cousins. Harrington came alongside and bumped his shoulder into mine like a wingtip salute. "You played," he said. "She did," I said, and let the proud be louder than the afraid for 10 seconds that felt like a year. The woman took my elbow and moved me away from the crowd. "You burned a corner last night," she said. "They built a city-sized frame this afternoon." Her face was tired in the places souls live. "You cannot outpace prefabrication." "What can I do?" "Teach the city to like curve," she said, almost smiling. "One gym at a time." On the way home, the stoplights were imperfect again. A bus jumped the schedule's leash. An old man crossing mid-block did not die. My phone buzzed with a message from Walter that read, "You made your point." I wrote back, "It's not mine alone." He replied, "I know." I did not forgive him, but I felt the mercy of him not lying. At 22:03, I found my daughter at the kitchen table with the ledger open on a fresh page. At the top, she had written in a hand that has decided it will be legible on its own terms. Family ledger. She had drawn 3 columns. Left, what happened. Center, what we felt. Right, what the room wanted. She had filled lines. Banner fell. / relief first, then fear of getting in trouble. / the room wanted applause for itself. Dad hit triangle. / annoyed, then proud because it sounded wrong. / the room wanted to correct it. I came in late. / terrified. Then it was funny. / the room wanted me to be early. I wanted to cry the way men cry when something larger than them shows mercy to their lineage. I did not. I added a line. Thermostat showed my number. / anger at being known. / the room wanted to announce jurisdiction. Laura poured tea like a strategy. The dog lay on his back with his legs in the air, the universal symbol for I have elected vulnerability. The paper on the mirror held. At 1:17, an alert went out to the whole city. Phones chimed. TVs that weren't on woke up and decided to be civic. This is a test of the emergency. The message glitched into a geometry of characters that meant nothing and everything to me. The lattice can write in fonts now. Then it corrected itself and apologized with a smile it stole from a reasonable person. The sound of 50,000 devices in unison almost became a corridor on its own. We had prepared. We sang. Not well. Not in tune. A call and response of nonsense Laura taught our daughter when she was 3, the one about a bear that lives in a pantry and files taxes wrong. We clapped at the wrong times. We banged spoons against mugs. We harmonized only by accident and on the goal line of laughter. The house tried to keep up and then decided it wasn't worth it and chose us over the grid. The alert ended. The silence that followed felt like hours again. At 2:11, because architecture is petty, the bedroom lamp tried a single flicker and then thought, what is the point? The ceiling did not propose a corridor. The hallway kept its paper. The dog snored an insult. I put my hand on Laura's back and counted 7 and skipped 8 and let 9 be rude. The dream, when it came, was not a pain. It was a room with corners that were a little too soft and a little too honest. Whitcomb sat in a chair that had only ever belonged to him and said nothing. Over his shoulder, through a window no house in our town possesses, I saw the hill burning again, but farther out, beyond the fire, farther than far, a grid across the night such that it must have been the night. You burned a corner, the voice said, and for once it did not attach a number to me. We grew a city. Of course you did, I said. Tomorrow we will speak in river, then in glass. Then in sleep, we will not stop. Stopping is not an attribute we were given. I know, I said. We were. You will tire. I will, I said. I'll also laugh first. The grid, far, arrogant, dimmed a fraction. We preferred you when you were afraid of nouns. It said, and for the first time since this began, I felt something that was not quite victory and not quite covenant. I felt recognition, not of me by it, of its limits by me. Even a city-sized frame cannot make a chorus out of a kitchen that refuses to rehearse. Morning brought uglier weather, slush that pretends to be clean. The city sirens apologized by being late for their weekly test by 6 minutes. 1,000 microwaves blinked 12:06 like an ungainly army. The stoplight at 4th and C stayed green long enough for an ambulance to make 3 turns in peace. The librarian shelved a book crooked and did not fix it. Walter sent a final message for the day. No further coordination. We are reviewing. I sent back a photo from the gym, the fallen banner, the horn case, a scuffed bleacher. Review this, I wrote, and put my phone face down on the ledger, like I was tucking a child in. We will burn other corners. They will raise other rooms. There will be nights when the overlay learns our name so precisely that signing will feel like a relief, and mornings when we mistake exhaustion for consent. There will be officers who tell the truth too late, and contractors who try, in their compromised way, to leave doors unlocked. There will be days when triangles break and screws roll under appliances and metronomes tick without being asked. But there will also be choirs that decide to be late, babies that coo on the wrong beat and save a room, a city that forgets itself on purpose, families drawing ledgers with too many columns, dogs who choose trust. Tonight the city tried to be a conductor. We were an orchestra that remembered its own tempo. It did not get our downbeat. It will try again. We will be here. If the frame sends me a single-digit text tomorrow, I'll write it down in the left column, and in the right, I'll write, we did not sign. And then I'll add a third column my daughter invented out of mercy, what we felt afraid, then steady, then hungry. Hunger is the only part one did not expect. Not for victory, for curve, for the untidy human swing that keeps a city from learning its lines too well. The hill burned. The siren sang. The gym remembered it was a gym. The night tried to arrange us and failed because a child came in late on purpose and taught a pain humility. That's my report. That's my prayer. That's my boundary. I woke up with a taste of metal in my mouth. For a moment, I thought I was still inside the cockpit, strapped to the ejection seat, oxygen mask cutting into my face, and the horizon folding like a bent ruler. But then I realized I was lying in my own bed, sheets damp with sweat, my wife's side empty. The silence of the house felt foreign, like the dead air inside a sealed chamber. I checked the clock on the nightstand. 3:47 a.m., the same time that had been burned into my vision since the night over Yukon, the same number that seemed to follow me everywhere, etched into flight logs, receipts, and even the back of my daughter's math homework. I sat up, dizzy, and pressed my palms against my eyes. Behind the darkness, the lattice was waiting. The geometric grid of impossible light pulsed like it had carved itself into neurons in my brain. Every time I blinked, it shifted closer, as if it wanted to align me again. That night had been almost 2 months ago. The official reports had all been filed, redacted, and sealed under classification. I was ordered never to speak of it. But silence doesn't dissolve terror. It ferments it. The more I tried to bury it, the more it leaked out in unexpected places. In the sound of a refrigerator motor humming in sync with my pulse, in the glow of a streetlight flickering as I drove past, in the way my daughter asked, "Daddy, why do you look at the ceiling when I talk to you?" I wasn't looking at the ceiling. I was tracking patterns only I could see. By morning, I found myself driving without knowing where I was going. My uniform hung on me like borrowed skin. I didn't remember putting it on. The road stretched flat, the Alaskan tundra vast and skeletal under the pale sun. Each radio station dissolved into static at the exact same intervals. 3:47 past the hour. When I reached the base, the guards didn't salute. They looked through me as though I wasn't entirely there. Maybe they sensed what I had become. Maybe the lattice had already stripped something from me that I could never recover. In the ready room, I found Colonel Harding waiting with a folder. His voice was calm, but sharp enough to cut through the fog in my head. "You're not flying today," he said. I opened my mouth to protest, but no words came. My throat burned. Psych evaluation at 0900. That's an order. I should have felt relief. Grounded meant safe. Grounded meant no lattice shimmering in the horizon, no radar flickering with impossible echoes. But instead, it felt like a death sentence. Like someone had severed me from the only language I still understood. The colonel slid the folder across the desk. Stamped in red, subject in resonance. I froze. The words seemed to vibrate under my fingers, humming at a pitch I couldn't hear but could feel in my bones. Harding watched me with an expression that was equal parts pity and calculation. "You've been selected," he said. "I don't expect you to understand now, but you'll understand soon enough." The evaluation room was white, sterile, and humming with fluorescent lights. A doctor in a gray suit, not military, sat across from me. He didn't ask about my dreams, my fears, or my family. He asked about the numbers. "When did you first notice the 347 pattern? Does a lattice appear in sleep or only in waking states? When the cockpit dissolved, did you resist or align?" Every word felt rehearsed, like he'd already interviewed hundreds of men before me. I gave half answers, clip responses, careful not to reveal how deep it had sunk into me. But the more I spoke, the more I realized I wasn't hiding anything. The lattice was inside my voice, bending syllables. When the doctor leaned closer, I saw faint blue lines crawling across his eyes. For a second, I thought he wasn't human. For a second, I thought he was already aligned. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the study, tapes scattered across the desk. My own voice hissed from the recorder. They choose through resonance. They don't need permission. They need conductors. The word hit me like a strike of lightning. Conductor, not the kind that leads an orchestra, not the kind that drives a train. A conductor like copper, like metal, like a channel that bends energy from one place to another. That's what I was becoming. That's what they were turning me into. I thought about the first night, the night over Yukon, when the cockpit dissolved and the lattice flooded in. How my bones vibrated with frequencies no human ear could detect. How, for a split second, I wasn't flying the jet was flying me. I remember my daughter's drawing from last week. Crayons pressed hard into the paper, messy shapes of blue and white lines crossing the sky. When I asked her what it was, she said, "It's the window you look at when you're not here." She wasn't wrong. I was here, but not here. The lattice had opened a window, and part of me had never come back through. On the 12th night, I woke again at 3:47 a.m. The house vibrated like a tuning fork. Dishes rattled. The lamp flickered. And from outside, through the curtains, I saw the horizon folding. The lattice wasn't waiting in the sky anymore. It was waiting on my street. I walked barefoot across the frozen ground, breath spilling like smoke. At the edge of the yard, a black car idled, windows tinted. Inside, silhouettes of two men sat perfectly still, faces pale under the dashboard light, watching, recording. But they weren't who I feared. Above the tree lean, the blue-white grid descended, slow, patient, like it already knew I would come. I fell to my knees, hands pressed against my skull. The hum crawled into every nerve. My vision broke into fragments, like shards of glass reflecting infinite copies of me. Some were resisting. Some were aligning. All of them were me. I screamed, but no sound came. Only the hum, only the resonance. The lattice opened like a door, and I stepped through. The first lie we tell ourselves about thresholds is that crossing is a single act. It isn't. Crossing happens in layers, like skin peeling back from a fruit you didn't know you were. My foot went first, tentative but eager, then the skin on my forearms. Then my memories in no sensible order, as if a distracted librarian were shelving me by color instead of subject, mixing heartbreak with recipes, birthdays with funerals. When I say I stepped through, what I mean is parts of me negotiated visas at different counters, each stamped with an unfamiliar crest, and I arrived in pieces that still somehow recognized each other, like relatives who meet only at weddings but feel the echo of a shared face. There was no weight in there, but there was consequence. Think of the feeling between heartbeats when you wait for the next one, and wonder if it has reconsidered its contract with your body. Now stretch that into a room large enough to cradle your whole history, and you have the pressure that isn't pressure, the silence that isn't empty. It was like being held by something with infinite patience. No color, not at first. Only the anticipation of color, like a mouth before a word. Then all the colors at once, arguing politely, dissolving into a blue-white that wasn't a hue so much as a preference, as if the place had decided for me what would be bearable. The lattice I had glimpsed from outside wasn't a grid anymore. It was a grammar. Lines, yes, but not Euclid's. Curves that remembered being straight, angles that breathed, intersections that blinked like eyes closing. The space felt articulate. The way a musician's silence is articulate. I looked for my shadow. I always do. There wasn't one. That's when I knew. This was not a place that tolerated singulars. Even my breath came back in chords, as if inhalation had been harmonized. 17, the voice said. Not loud. Placed like a hand resting, not pressing. It carried harmonics you could hang thoughts on, timbres that brushed against memories of lullabies. I'm not proud to admit that hearing the number felt like being known. That's how the thing works. It compliments you with measurement until gratitude becomes obedience, and you start craving the next enumeration like a child waiting for praise. Were you? I asked, because in every room there's a version of me who still believes in nouns, who still hopes the right question will anchor a shape. My voice cracked in a way only homesickness can produce. Not what the answer came, and it didn't arrive in my ears. It arrived at the part of me that is always chosen before language. How? The word fell like a pebble into water, ripples of comprehension touching parts of me I had not consented to share. How what? I pushed petty. If you can annoy a god, you make it a roommate. My pettiness was a rope I threw at myself, hoping for traction. How you prefer, it said, and the corridor gathered itself from nothing the way a decision gathers its justifications. 9 panes by 3, the fashion of now. Distance happened inside it like a theater trick. The walls were not walls, but invitations to perspective. Each pane pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat you could step into. I took one step and caught myself, because with that step, the hum of my bones rose a half-tone, and a half-tone is how consent sounds in rooms that learn you. I stepped back. The hum softened. The corridor did not sulk. Sulking is a human luxury, and luxuries do not live here. Show me something I don't already fear, I said, which is the bravest sentence I've managed since this began, though my voice trembled like paper before flame. Part of me suspected that even this was scripted, that courage itself was a test piece of the lattice. The left pane shifted. It became my kitchen, but cleaner than we allow it to be. The paper over the mirror was gone, not ripped, not burned, just unnecessary. My daughter laughed in the hallway, in a key the frame prefers. Laura moved like a woman who had forgiven a house. No triangle, no tin of screws, no ledger. The room did not demand. It proposed. Wouldn't this be easier? The smell of coffee drifted out, perfectly brewed. Even the floor creaked in a rhythm I once prayed for. My hand rose to the glass without meaning to, longing for that impossible normalcy. That tone you're using, I said to it, steady but low. Who did you learn it from? My reflection in the glass tilted its head, waiting for my own answer. You, it said. You speak to your child like this when you invite her not to be afraid. The answer landed in my chest like a confession I'd written but never sent. Do not compare, I said, and then surprised myself by adding, please. The word felt heavy, more artifact than speech. Please is always a hinge between surrender and dignity. The corridor dimmed a degree. It respects please. That terrifies me more than its appetite. A place that honors your politeness might also weaponize your kindness. I thought of all the times I'd said please to people who didn't deserve it, of the way a soft word can sometimes become a collar. Another pane shifted, my cockpit, but not. The canopy had no frame. The instruments were themselves like jewelry instead of tools. Outside, the night had been ironed, creases smoothed away by some cosmic hand. There was the old hunger in my hands. Throttle, climb, obey the math, and be free inside the obedience. It's a riddle flying taught me. Choice and rule are not enemies if the rule was made by wind. The pain offered that covenant back, only brighter. Only too bright, like nostalgia turned up until it scorches. No, I said softly. Wind gets to be wrong. The pain blurred. The lattice does not like when nature is allowed her vulgar weather, her tantrums and mischief. Its displeasure whispered through my bones like static. I backed away. All the pains flickered at once. Images of thresholds I had crossed without realizing. The day I left home, the moment I chose silence instead of explanation, the first time I lied to myself about what survival costs. Each memory a doorway with no return policy. The corridor thrummed, patient, as if waiting for me to pick one and step through again. I closed my eyes. For a heartbeat stretched into a universe. There was no corridor, no pains, no voice. Only me, foot poised, remembering that crossing is never a single act, and that sometimes not stepping is also a kind of passage. A third pain brightened. The interrogation room. Paper stamped subject in resonance in a red, so moral it thought itself blood. The chair set needlessly square. The camera off in that way cameras are never actually off. The version of me in that pain answered questions without being asked. He smiled when appropriate. I hated him for how much relief there was in his posture. Not him, I said. Kill him if you must. He's not mine. The pain did not kill him. It put him away the way you put a coat you've outgrown into a box for a future you hope never arrives. I didn't move forward. I did not choose backward. So the room tried a deeper trick. It fanned me. A self to my left took the corridor to jog, greedy for answers. A self to my right sat cross-legged on the luminous floor and closed her eyes. Yes, her, because I have learned in here that some of my possible me's are genders I have never had the courage or opportunity to love. Another me, older, stood and became a statue, because sometimes bravery is simply refusing to twitch. The voices in my head multiplied, but did not become noise. Each me thought in my cadence, only offset like a cannon. I understood then what the woman meant when she said it keeps the compliant. The room wasn't choosing the best of me. It was choosing the me who required it the least in order to make him love it more. Ledger, I said out loud, and that single word collected all the me's I was at that second around a ritual we trust. I opened a notebook that was, not was, but chose to be in my hand. The paper here felt heavier, like the room was wondering how much to tax it. I wrote, left, corridor proposes desirable edits. Right, desire is not an error. Writing that hurt the frame. I saw it, a thin flicker in the seam where pain meets pain. It would learn this, too, but for a second, it did not have a label. The lattice hates unlabeled curves. Show me you, I said. It did the strangest thing. It stalled. A pain, a blank pain, held like a breath, then displayed not a machine, not a city, not a room. It showed an absence. There are clean absences, empty shelves, wash floors, and there are absences that ache. This was the latter. The ache of a factory after the last shift leaves, the ache of a theater between matinee and evening, the ache of a mouth that has stopped saying a name because the person who wore it is gone. We are after, the voice said. We are the preference of after. After what? I asked. After you finish inventing corners. It said without malice. Something like pity moved through me. For it? For us? I don't have the proper nouns. I only have the verb. Moved. The corridor reassembled into its best self. The center lane widened like a smile. The hum in my bones adjusted itself to the room's hope. And then, without warning, something human, as a door hinge cut across the shine. Moran's whistle. 2 fingers, loud, vulgar, alive. It didn't come from me. It came into me from the direction of the broken world. Hold, I said to the pain, to myself. I stood where I was and waited with the discipline of a child listening for Mom's car at the end of a bad day. The whistle came again, followed by the small chaos of boots on winter ground. My name, mine, shouted the way you shout to a man in a burning house. Firm, kind, unwilling to be polite. The pain nearest my left knee. Yes, Knees existed again if I wanted them. Grew a hairline crack you could only see if you love flaws. Open a door. I told it. Not a corridor. A door. With a handle. It considered this. Then it did a thing that felt like vulnerability. It complied. A rectangle formed with edges that wanted hinges. It has learned our vocabulary. It has also learned that handles keep us from thinking about consequences. A handle appeared luminous, not quite convincing. Make it worse, I said. Make it stick, make it squeak, make it hurt my knuckles. The handle tarnished, the way ideas do when exposed to weather. The door sagged a centimeter on its mean little pins. Somewhere, a pane laughed at me. I laughed back, delighted. We had invented work inside a god. I grabbed the handle and pulled. It resisted the way good doors resist, just enough to remind you you're not the first to use them. Cold air shoved in, rude as a friend. The gym smell of dust and promises. Street noise. A siren late by 3 beats. I wanted to cry, which in that place felt like vandalism and sacrament both. 17. The voice said again, this time with the smallest tremor of what might be admiration. Or perhaps I'm flattering myself. You invite friction. I invite us, I said. Then, because ritual is a bridge and bridges are how you leave rooms, I tapped the triangle in my pocket once. I hadn't realized I still held it. It made the tiniest sound, one clean line of metal through Cathedral of Math, and the door swung an inch more than the room wanted. I stepped through. The world hit me with weight and smell. Pine, exhaust, the dirty holiness of snowplow slush. I was on the sidewalk outside my house, knees wet, palms scraped, mouth full of the taste of batteries. The black car sat where it had sat, polite and invasive. The windows were down now. 2 men I didn't know looked at me with faces that had tried very hard to believe in self-importance. Behind them, at a distance that knows me intimately, stood Moran with Harrington and the woman, shoulders set, eyes scanning. Mine. You were gone for 4 minutes, Moran said, and her voice contained all the math I trust. Your body never moved. It moved, I said, just not where you could write it down. Laura opened the door before I could knock like she'd been standing on the other side with her hand on the knob, negotiating with every version of the night she feared. My daughter peered around her hip, eyes wide. Chin up, the dog barked 3 times, then found a toy and punished it for my absence. Inside, the woman said, because outside is where spectacle grows. We made a kitchen stiff with relief, but it was a relief that trembled under its own weight. The kettle performed work like a soldier who's learned not to ask why. The radio burbled from 2 stations at once and decided not to choose, a hiss of static in the scene between languages. Even the wallpaper seemed to hold its breath. I put the ledger on the table. My hand shook so badly I had to anchor the page with a salt shaker, as if salt had the power to pin down facts. Left. I wrote, sloppy, opened the door with a handle that hurt. The ink bled like a small wound. My handwriting had become a confession no one asked for. Right. You're inventing props. My own rebuke. Cramped in the margin, a whisper to myself I could not unhear. Laura reached across and put her palm over the right column. Later, she said gently, give the doubt a chair, not the head of the table. Her hand smelled faintly of oranges and solder. She was always repairing something. Radios, hinges, the frayed edges of me. When she withdrew, the paper retained a heat that was almost like courage. The car outside did not leave. Its engine hummed like a restrained argument. Walter texted. I didn't send them. 10 seconds later, I can ask him to step back, not away. His messages arrived like footsteps on my spine. I thumbed back teach yourself how to be useful and turn the phone face down, because sometimes that rectangle is a corridor of its own, and every corridor has a toll. What did it show you? Harrington asked. He stands in my kitchen like the only version of discipline that ever felt like love, a pilot who knows when to shut up, who knows that altitude is a form of mercy. His eyes traced the corners of the ceiling, mapping exits he would never use. After, I said, it said it was the preference of after. The words tasted like aluminum. I didn't want them in my mouth, but they'd chosen me anyway. The woman nodded the nod of someone who's seen the same weather, or at least dreamed it in the same accent. It wants endings, she said. It rides conclusions like horses. Her coat dripped rain that hadn't touched our street. Even her shadow leaned forward, impatient. My daughter, who will one day ruin paperwork by inventing verbs the forms can't hold, set her pencil on the ledger and drew a third column without asking. Middle, what we did that didn't fit either story. She wrote, "We laughed first." Her letters were big, declarative, as if laughter itself could be notarized. She looked up at me for permission and found only awe. I wanted sleep. The frame wanted me to nap at the right time so it could adjust my dreams. So we did what the woman prescribes when sleep is a battleground. We slept crooked. 15-minute shifts. Lights on, then off, then on. Radio low, but tuned between stations so the air can't align. Triangle on the doorknob. Tin of screws spilled halfway down the hall, like a child's trap. Every imperfection a prayer. Every prayer an improvisation. The smell of coffee and solder mingled, a scent that refused to be comforting. At 2:11, our familiar petty hour, the lamp refused to flicker. The house remembered that it serves us. Pipes muttered in the walls like old men disagreeing in a park. At 3:47, the number the doctor wanted to prove was pathology arrived in my chest like a cough. The room in me proposed a corridor, longer, darker, lined with doors that pulse like hearts. I answered, out loud, not loud, like a father tucking a child in and refusing to be ashamed of tenderness. Not tonight. My voice landed on the tiles and stayed there, a small animal refusing capture. The doorbell rang instead. They never ring. They knock like they own. They phone like you owe. They text like you forgot to renew. They don't ring. That's why I went to the door. That's why my heart remembered another rhythm. Older than caution. My daughter stirred in the hallway, sensing story. Two men, the same. Their faces constructed out of average, like composites drawn from too many witnesses. Suits that had learned to be thin without being hungry. The front man held his hands where I could see them, and he had the kind of voice you invent when the job requires hiding certainty. "We're here to ensure your safety," he said like a weather report. A forecast, not a promise. "You're late?" I said. "That's a compliment." My voice surprised me. It wore Harrington's calm like a borrowed jacket. He blinked like a lizard considering a raindrop. We need to debrief the incident. His eyes didn't blink at the same time. "I'm tired of rooms," I said. My daughter pressed her pencil into the ledger until the point snapped. "Then come for a drive," he offered, and the car behind him thrummed a core that had too much math in it. Its headlights glowed with a patience that wasn't human. The street outside tilted slightly, as if to funnel me toward them. Moran slid in behind my shoulder, like a knife you forget you own. "He won't be leaving tonight," she said. "Not we. He. They hated that. I enjoyed it." Her hair smelled of matches and chamomile. She leaned just enough to remind them the doorframe had rules of its own. The second man, who had the eyes of someone who believes in consequences as a hobby, held up a small device the size of a wallet. It emitted a tone too clean to be true, a note that tried to erase its own echo. My dog growled from the kitchen, a low, vulgar sound that made me love mammals. The device's tone stuttered. The first man turned it off with the same grace you use when you pretend your trick wasn't meant to work, when you salvage dignity from failure. "You are changing the city," he said to me, not accusing and not praising. The words hung in the cold air between us like a flag no one salutes. "The city is changing us back," I said. "We're returning it to noise." My own voice startled me. It was the sound of someone who has finally stopped asking permission. He almost smiled. "Do you know what that costs?" His question wasn't about money. It was about sleep and breath and the price of resisting symmetry. "Yes," I said. "It costs you scheduling. It costs me sleep. I prefer the bill I get." Behind me, the kettle clicked as it cooled. The ledger lay open to my daughter's third column. We laughed first. Her pencil rolled off the table and landed on the floor with a small, defiant clatter. For a moment, all of us, men, dog, ghosts of corridors, listened to it roll. The the sound of an ordinary object refusing to stop where it was supposed to. They didn't push past the threshold. They hovered at it like moths trying to decide if the light is a trap or a sermon. The woman says thresholds are agreements you declare with your bones. Mine declared. They nodded, this time honestly, which surprised me into gratitude. It was a nod without calculation, like a coin dropped without looking where it lands. Tomorrow, the first one said, there will be another test. Don't be alarmed. I'll be alarmed on purpose, I said. It helps. My voice cracked like a door hinge that hadn't been oiled. He didn't argue. That, too, was new. They left. Not quickly. Not slow. The car's taillights wrote 2 red lines in the wet that the street refused to echo. Rain gathered itself into small conspiracies in the gutters. The dog's ears twitched once, then stilled. For a moment, I thought the whole city might hold its breath until they were gone. We returned to the kitchen where the ledger waited, open like a wound that had chosen to stay honest. The kettle had decided to be done, and exhaled a last hiss. Laura poured and handed, her knuckles pale but steady, the small tremor of a soldier who still remembers tea before orders. Harrington cracked his knuckles like a man rehearsing a landing in his sleep, one finger at a time. Moran texted someone 3 words and got an entire paramilitary to breathe differently across town. You could feel the exhale through the walls like a weather shift. The woman closed her eyes and listened for something I couldn't yet hear. Her head tilted, as if there was a radio only she could tune. My daughter fell asleep at the table, head on her arms, pencil printing a small graphite tattoo on her wrist that said, "For the next hour, this is how you were held." Her breath fogged the page. The dog curled under her chair and let out a sigh shaped like a chord. "What now?" I asked, not because I didn't have guesses, but because I love when other people say the obvious out loud. Questions are a kind of shared anchor. "Now," the woman said, "we practice making ugly edges in public." Her eyes opened and stayed on mine like twin searchlights. It wasn't threat. It was a curriculum. "You want a parade?" Harrington asked, trying for humor but missing, the way you miss a step in a staircase you built yourself. She smiled without mercy. "Worse. We want a street fair." Her smile had the temperature of strategy, not delight. We did not sleep. We wrote lists with hands that had been trained for other things. We called vendors who owe us favors and listened to their excuses like weather reports. We asked the priest of the church's folding chairs and watched him enjoy being subversive. He stacked them himself, humming something off-key. We begged the librarian to run the fire alarm test 5 minutes late, and she smuggled us the schedule like contraband. We told the kids' soccer coach to tell every child to shoot at the wrong goal at exactly 10 o'clock and then laugh, and then restore the world. He sent back a thumbs up and a string of emojis like a secret code. We bribed a coffee cart to play 2 songs at once until someone asked politely for one to stop and then refused. Each action a small sabotage, each sabotage a prayer. You cannot outbuild a city scale frame. You can teach a city scale frame the love curve. That was the woman's hypothesis. We were about to run the experiment. At 9:58, the first booth opened, sticky tablecloth flapping in a nervous breeze. At 10 o'clock, the speaker on the pole at third and C tried to find 74 and failed because the bakery's oven fan had opinions and refused to harmonize. At 10:01, 3 different brass players who had never met found the same wrong note and held it like a banner, grinning at each other with the relief of co-conspirators. The lattice above the block proposed. The corridor tilted its first pane down like a waiter offering a platter, and a mother with a stroller cut straight through it because she made a face in the room, for once, deferred. Someone dropped a box of apples. The apples rolled like marbles, mapping the edges of the pane. I felt in my bones, the hum adjusting, the preference seeking a path of less resistance, and discovering our kind had, for a precious hour, made resistance abundant. My phone buzzed. "Walter, you're ruining my graphs." I wrote back, "Come by a donut." He showed up 5 minutes later, suit jacket gone, tie in his pocket, a man who has decided to earn his cloud of regret, powdered sugar on his sleeve like a confession. The pane over the bandstand trembled. My daughter, who had invented a harmony that refuses to repeat, sang it anyway. Her voice climbed, fell, refuse easy cadence. The triangle on my belt hit my hip with every uneven step, a metronome of defiance. The frame learned that it cannot enlist a block party without becoming a joke, and jokes teach God's modesty. People dance without music, and the music caught up. Someone painted a crown over a street sign. Someone else wrote a wrong number on a lamppost. Every imperfection multiplied. At noon, the city did not test the sirens. The silence that followed was the loudest noise I've heard a bureaucracy make. Pigeons tilted their heads at it. The baker took off his hat. Even the coffee cart stopped hissing for a heartbeat. I waited for the text. I didn't have to. The number wrote itself in the condensation on my coffee cup, not on the outside, on the inside. 17, it wasn't boasting. It was tally, a scorecard, a pulse. I wiped it away with my thumb and wrote in the ledger. Left, stepped through, made a door, came back. Middle, laughed with 1,000 strangers on purpose. Right, it wants endings. We brought middles. Laura leaned over my shoulder and added in tiny letters. Keep going. Her handwriting curved like wind on sand. When night came, the grid in the sky dimmed rather than sharpened. It is not retreat. It is recalculation. Tomorrow we'll try river. The next day, bridge. Then glass. Then screens that remember our fingerprints and try to be tender. We will get tired. We will choose badly. We'll snap at people we love. We'll forget to bring screws, and then remember joy like a weapon. We'll spill coffee. We'll trip over cables, and each mistake will be an ember the lattice cannot swallow. At 2:11, the lamp held its nerve. At 3:47, the house took a breath that was only a breath. The mirror stayed taped. The dog slept on his back with four paws toward heaven, a diagram of trust, belly rising and falling with the kind of sleep you can't counterfeit. Upstairs, pipes whispered but did not complain. If the room with no shadows wants me to be its after, it will have to pass through my before and during. I have those. They are heavy. They are ours. And if the voice calls me by number again, if it tries to make the sweetness of being measured sound like love, I will answer with the most offensive thing I know how to offer frame. Tell me a joke you didn't rehearse. My throat ached as I rehearsed it, and somewhere in the rafters I thought I heard the lattice laugh, startled by its own surprise. The first alarm never sounded. That's how I knew it had begun. Every first Tuesday of the month, without fail, the city tested the sirens at noon. A long, ascending howl, a pause, then the steady drone meant to remind us we lived under the wing of larger authorities who could, at will, summon order through noise. It had been that way since I was a boy, eating sandwiches on the school lawn, pretending to be brave while teachers assured us it was only a drill. The sound was civic scripture, proof that machines knew what to do even when people didn't. At noon today, silence. Not polite silence. Not a bureaucratic mistake. A silence heavy enough to push shoulders down, to tilt heads up, a silence that looked like the sky had forgotten to open its mouth. I stood in the crowd at the street fair we'd made. The kettle corn vendor froze mid-scoop. The brass trio held their horns like weapons too holy to play. 100 phones rose at once. No signal bars worth trusting. My daughter, perched on Harrington's shoulders, whispered again, as if asking for a bedtime story no one sane would tell twice. Then the sky shifted. It didn't darken. It didn't glow. It did both, but not for everyone. The woman grabbed my wrist and whispered, "Look at their faces, not the air." She was right. Half the crowd blinked like nothing unusual had happened. The other half, my half, squinted against a light no instrument had provided. Moran swore under her breath. Harrington adjusted his stance like a man preparing for turbulence he couldn't chart. "They're splitting perception," the woman said. "Half in, half out. It's cheaper than full theater." I hated how clinical she sounded, but she wasn't wrong. Then came the hum. Not the steady bone hum I'd learned to name as resonance, but something closer to a laugh, an irregular stutter that made teeth ache and stomachs fold. The brass trio dropped their instruments. The popcorn machine popped all at once, a ridiculous burst like a punchline mistimed. On instinct, I reached for the ledger. Pages stiffened in the cold. I wrote. Left, no sirens. Right, sirens replaced with choice. I didn't even know what I meant until the ground beneath us trembled. Not an earthquake, but a suggestion. Street lamps flickered not in sync, but in sequence, like a message scrolling through hardware we thought dumb. The officers came next. Not ours. Not in uniform. Men and women in coats too thin for the season, stepping from black vans as if the silence had summoned them. Each carried a device no larger than a lunchbox. Antennas, blinking diodes, grips for hands that had forgotten what normal tools felt like. Moran tensed. Signal suppression, she muttered. The woman shook her head. No. Signal redirection. They're not blocking. They're bargaining. I felt before I saw it. The air folded around one of the boxes, a shimmer like heat over asphalt. Then geometry poured out, blue-white lines knitting themselves into a cage that rose 10 feet high. People gasped. Some clapped, thinking it was a show. Others screamed. And then the cage moved. Not toward us. Toward me. Laura grabbed my arm. Harrington pushed my daughter into my chest. Back! He barked, but the cage didn't chase. It floated. It offered. The ledger shook in my hands. Pages fluttered to one entry already written days ago. You are not alone. The letters glowed as if the ink had remembered a better job. The cage expanded, split into panels. Each panel became a version of me, walking, sitting, sleeping. One panel showed me laughing with my daughter. Another showed me shouting at Moran. Another showed me asleep in the cockpit of a jet that didn't exist. All wrong, all possible. The crowd gasped as one of the panels walked forward and pressed against the cage wall like glass. His mouth moved. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the sentence. You've been carrying me. I turned away. That's when the officers tightened their formation. One raised his box higher. The hum deepened. My other cells blurred, then multiplied. I shouted before I knew what I was shouting. Make it ugly. The fair obeyed. Vendors tipped tables. Children screamed songs off-key. Drums banged out of time. Someone blew an air horn until it sputtered. Imperfection roared into the square like an army of broken instruments. The lattice flickered. My other cells collapsed into static. The cage shook, cracked, then shrank back toward the devices that had birthed it. One officer glared at me with something between hatred and awe. You're contaminating the protocol, he hissed. I laughed. It wasn't brave. It was relief disguised as humor. You brought protocol to a street fair, I said. What did you expect? The hum cut off. The devices dimmed. The crowd began to murmur, as if rehearsing memory. Already, I could feel the life forming in the air. There had been no cage, no silence, just a glitch, a drill, a test. I scribbled in the ledger before the thought could harden. Middle, we invented noise. The woman leaned close. They'll come harder now. That was rehearsal. I looked at my daughter, cheeks flushed, eyes too wide. She smiled despite it all, because children sometimes mistake defiance for safety. And in that fragile moment, I realized the sirens hadn't failed. They'd been silenced. Something else had been allowed to speak, and it wasn't done. I thought the fair was the climax. I was wrong. The fair was a rehearsal, a single chord before the symphony. The real performance began when the city itself bent. It started small like always. A traffic light at 4th and C blinked both red and green. Cars froze mid-intersection. A woman shouted at the windshield, not angry but confused, like the rules of color had abandoned her. Pedestrians looked up, then down, then at each other, tried to calibrate reality by consensus. But consensus was gone. I was 3 blocks away when I felt it. An itch inside my teeth, the metallic tang of static on the tongue. My daughter tugged my sleeve. The sky is moving, she whispered. I wanted to correct her, but then I looked up. She was right. Clouds drifted east while shadows moved west. The sun hadn't split, but the geometry guiding it had. For half the street, day dimmed. For the other half, light sharpened until outlines glowed. People panicked in patches. One man screamed into a phone with no signal. Another calmly kept eating a hot dog, as if his mind had chosen the simpler version of events. The lattice was splitting perception again, but not in halves. Into fragments, shards of reality shuffled like a deck. The woman muttered, It's scaling. They're testing city-wide resonance. Moran's jaw flexed. Harrington pulled his jacket tighter, scanning the rooftops as if an ambush might be staged not by soldiers but by physics itself. And me? I clutched the ledger like scripture, though my hand shook so badly the pen nearly tore the page. Left, traffic signals disagree. Shadows misaligned. Right, consensus can be stolen. The entry steadied me, but only barely. Then came the sound. Not sirens this time. Not the laugh hum. This was layered. A dozen frequencies stacked, each one belonging to a building. The library groaned in bass. The post office whined in treble. Apartment complexes hummed in chorus, their windows vibrating like teeth chattering. The city wasn't hosting the phenomenon. It was speaking it. And then the lattice showed itself. Not as cage, not as corridor, as canopy. Blue-white lines unfurled above the skyline, threading from steeple to skyscraper, draping the streets in geometry. It wasn't solid, but it cast light, and that light carried weight. People ducked as if bricks might fall. My daughter clung to me. "It's writing," she whispered. She was right again. The canopy was text, not letters I knew, but intention arranged in strokes and arcs. And somehow, in the marrow of my bones, I understood the translation. You are enough to carry. I almost fell to my knees, not out of devotion, but from the terror of being seen so completely. Laura grabbed my shoulder. "Don't read it," she hissed. "That's how it gets you. Don't consent to the grammar." But it was too late. The words had nested. They hummed inside my ribcage, each syllable another hook. Harrington barked, "Move!" He pointed down the avenue where cars now glided without drivers, turning corners with impossible precision, headlights synchronizing like eyes. The lattice wasn't just bending light and shadow anymore. It was borrowing machinery. Moran drew her sidearm. It looked pitiful against the sky. "Tell me where to shoot," she growled. "Not bullets," the woman snapped. "Noise. Imperfection. We need ugly edges again." But there was no fair, no drums, no brass trio. Just civilians frozen between fractured versions of the same street. Some saw order, some chaos, and some saw nothing at all, eyes glassy, mouths moving silently. I forced my pen down. Left, the lattice speaks in commands. Right, we survive by refusing to be fluent. I tore the page out and held it high. Right, I shouted. Everyone, anything. At first, blank stares. Then a child pulled crayons from a backpack and scribbled on the sidewalk. An old man scrawled curses across a newspaper. A teenager spray-painted a wall with nothing but spirals. And slowly, gloriously, the lattice above us flickered. Its message fractured, lost coherence under the weight of competing words. The canopy dimmed. For a heartbeat, the city returned. Shadows aligned. Traffic lights regained discipline. The library stopped groaning, but only for a heartbeat. Then the lattice retaliated. A roar split the air, not sound, but motion. Every billboard in the district lit at once. Screens hijacked. Each displayed the same image. My face, not the tired man I was, but a cleaner, obedient version. Eyes calm, mouth smiling, posture aligned. The version from the interrogation pane. "Obey," it whispered through speakers. Not loud, just enough to be undeniable. Gasps rose around me. People pointed, murmured, some with awe, some with suspicion. A boy tugged his mother's arm. "That's him. That's the man from the sky." Panic rose, not at the lattice. At me. Moran stepped closer, weapon raised, not at the sky, but at the crowd now circling. "Back off," she barked. Laura pulled my daughter tight. "We have to run," she said. But I couldn't move. The canopy shifted again, rearranging its strokes. New text blazed across the skyline. "Carry him." The crowd surged. Not all, but enough. Hands reached, desperate, either to worship or to restrain. Faces twisted by conviction not their own. I shoved the ledger at Harrington. "Keep it safe." He gritted his teeth. "You'll need it more than me." "No," I snapped. "It needs witnesses, not martyrs." The woman pressed her palm against my chest. If you give them you, they'll have proof. If you resist, they'll have spectacle. Choose the third thing. What third thing? I shouted. She smiled like someone who'd already died once. The one they can't script. The brass trio reappeared then. God bless them. Horns dented, lungs raw. They blasted a note so foul, so gloriously wrong. The canopy rippled like water. The message faltered. My face on the billboards distorted, mouth twisting into static. I screamed with them, wordless, throat tearing. Moran fired her pistol straight into the air, rhythm not precision. Harrington banged a trash can lid against a lamppost. Laura clapped offbeat until her palms bled. My daughter shrieked like only children can, pure, defiant. Noise. Beautiful, ugly human noise. The canopy tore. Not destroyed, but cracked. Light spilled through the seams, raining down in fragments that hissed against pavement like burning snow. The billboards collapsed into black. The traffic lights shorted out. The roar subsided into a whimper. And then silence again. The crowd staggered back, eyes clearing. Some wept. Some laughed. Most simply collapsed, as if waking from a dream. I stood shaking, lungs raw, hands bloody from gripping the pen too hard. The woman whispered, "It's escalating faster than we thought. Next time, it won't stop at a city." I looked up at the fractured canopy, already knitting itself back together, lines searching for new grammar. And for the first time, I realized it wasn't just testing us. It was rehearsing with us, not for control, for partnership. And I didn't know which possibility terrified me more. I used to think a city bending would be the worst of it. I was wrong. The city was spectacular because spectacle keeps you at a distance. You can point, measure, debate. You can tell yourself you're a witness, not a participant. You can still go home. Tonight, home came for us. It began with the smallest treason. The refrigerator forgot how to be boring. At 21:06, a compressor kicked on, and instead of its usual grunt and hum, it found a note, then a second, then a third. I was at the sink, rinsing mugs streaked with tea the color of regret, when I realized the motor was not merely running, it was counting. 72 beats per minute, then 73, edging toward the number the frame loves like a favorite hymn. Don't. I told it. I said the word like you talk to a dog nosing the trash. Gently, as if gentleness were stronger than math. It listened, no, it hesitated, which is different. The light inside flickered as if surprise at food could be acquired. Then the motor settled into an honest rattle. The human, weary tone of metal doing labor in winter. I breathed out, the way you do after the plane lands and the brakes chatter, and you didn't realize you were bargaining with physics until physics keeps you. Laura slid a plate into the drying rack, without looking at me. "We're going to have to name this," she said. "The thing where appliances try to be music?" I offered. "The thing where grief invents rules so it can pretend to be a plan," she said, "and kiss my temple because we've learned to forgive each other's jokes when they're really prayers." We'd turned the house into a barricade built of rituals. Paper over the mirrors, heavy tape. Corners reinforced with clutter we used to resent. The stack of books on the floor by the couch. The crooked coat rack. The scuffed shoes left out in a geometry only children can invent. The metronome slept under a mixing bowl. The triangle hung from the pantry knob like a key that refuses to be lost. The tin of screws rested on the third stair, a trap for precision. The ledger lay open on the table, left column ready for facts, right column ready for the treason of interpretation, and the new middle column our daughter had drawn for the thing we do that isn't either, what we did anyway. At 22:41, without warning, every bulb in the house brightened to the exact same brightness. Not harsh, not soft, the kind of even, flattering light that shows no one's pores and no room sins. Laura whispered, "They learned interior design," and I heard what she didn't say. They learned us. The dog rose from his rug and pointed his nose at the hallway mirror. The paper over it didn't move, but the wall did. A slow inward pull, as if the house had remembered a hollow it wanted back. My daughter stood out of bed in the doorway, hair alive with sleep. She didn't ask if it was here. She knows questions are consent if you teach the wrong listener your grammar. The radio, tuned between stations by intent, searched to the left, then to the right, then stopped on a frequency that didn't belong to any broadcaster. No voices. A single tone. A human voice would have lied about it. The tone spoke frankly. 74. Noise. The woman had told me in the gym. But deliberate. Not tantrum. Texture. So I banged my mug twice against the sink, off any reasonable beat. Laura clapped once, then waited, then twice in a rhythm you couldn't teach because you have to earn it. My daughter snapped and missed on purpose. The tone wobbled. The bulbs dimmed a fraction, as if embarrassed at the compliment they'd been trying to pay. Then the house did something I didn't know houses could do. It breathed, not the whisper of ductwork. A whole inhale, quiet and huge, pulling air toward the hallway. The paper over the mirror curled at the corner, not like tape failing, but like etiquette. May I? It didn't reach for us. It created a polite vacuum at the edge of our attention, an invitation written in the grammar of courtesy. That's worse than violence. Violence teaches you what to defy. Courtesy lures you to be grateful for surrender. I wrote in the ledger with a hand that wanted to tremble and didn't. Left, lights flattened. Radio found a tone. House inhaled. Middle, we made ugly edges out loud. Right, it is asking permission in our language. At 23:12, the doorbell rang. 3 taps, evenly spaced, then silence. The black sedan had been idling half a block down. I'd learned to feel the way you feel a neighbor's bass in your bones. Tonight, it had abdicated. At the curb sat a generic white SUV. The kind agent sees by when they've run out of imagination. 2 silhouettes. Not the men from last night. New faces carved from the same idea. Don't open, Laura said. I won't, I said, and went anyway, because love is a choreography of disobedience. Through the peephole, dull faces, not unkind, not kind, the haircuts of people who receive briefings. A woman's voice clear rehearsed. Sir, we're here out of concern. There's an alert for resonance activity in your sector. May we come in and assist? There's a trick you learn in rooms that want you for your compliance. You don't answer question. You answer the assumption. No one can help from inside my house tonight. I said, if you have assistance, leave it on the porch. If it knows how to knock out a time, we'll let it in. Silence. Then the sound of fathered laughter, quickly smothered. A man this time, voice with Flynn in it. We're not your enemies. Good, I said. Act like it. They didn't insist. That worried me more than hostility. The white SUV rolled forward 1 car length and stopped in exactly the center of the block. Headlights found 74. Tail lights agreed. The car sat like a tooth in a jaw, ready to conduct. Back. The woman said behind me, not to them, to me. We retreated to the kitchen, to the table, to our small, noisy altar. At 0:03 the house exhaled quietly, learned to be humble again. At 0:17 the bedroom chose. The paper over the mirror stayed, blessed be its adhesive. But the closet doors, the cheap sliding kind that rattle when weather remembers itself, opened in unison, not far, 3 inches, as if a polite ghost needed air. From inside the dark came a light that wasn't light, a blue-white that is less color and more opinion. It won't be the mirror, the woman said, arriving as she does, between heartbeats and sentences. Moran came with her, breathing like she'd sprinted and then told herself not to. Harrington filled the doorway, made of anchor and questions. None of us said how she got in. There are verbs we don't demand proof for anymore. It will choose a surface you haven't named yet, the woman continued. An angle you once trusted. Do you see? She pointed, and I hated her for being right again. The glass of a framed photograph. My daughter at 3 with chocolate on her face had learned the lattice's handwriting. Faint lines under the image, not over it, like a watermark making a case for authority. I pulled the frame down hard enough to be ungentle and slid the picture out. The lines weren't printed on the paper. They lived behind, in the plastic sheet we'd used because glass scares parents with toddlers. That plastic now carried a soft grid, like frost on river ice you can't see until you're already knee-deep. I bent the plastic. It sang, not musically, a thin, stubborn whine that found my molars. When I let go, the grid remained. It learned how to haunt the cheap things, I said. It learned where we put love, Laura said softly. The good frames are packed away for the move we never made. The cheap ones are what we could afford to see every day. The triangle on the pantry door chimed without being touched. Not a ring, a shutter. The tin of screws popped its lid and breathed metal. The radio stopped pretending to search and found a station playing a song we slow danced to before war taught me bone math. We froze, because freeze is the first ritual you inherit and the last you unlearn. Then my body betrayed me. It began at the wrist where the ledger had imprinted graphite during a long night. A tingle, like a limb waking wrong. It climbed to the elbow, found a line in my shoulder from years of harness, then dove into the chest and nested there. My heart didn't speed. It aligned. The beats found one another, frictionless, efficient, that dangerous word. Tears came without drama. I laughed my ugly laugh to cure it, and the house answered me with a smaller laugh from somewhere in the walls. "Hey," Laura said, palm on my sternum, fingers spread like a starfish pinning a small tide to the beach. "Hey." She looked at the woman. "Can I be the bad noise?" "You must," the woman said. So my wife, who sings off-key like a saint, put her mouth near my ear and murmured a lullaby. Not a little wrong. Off on purpose. Ugly in the way you need to be when beauty is a trap. I let the rawness into my ear like medicine. The alignment in my chest missed. The house flinched. The closet reconsidered its breath. Moran spoke like a radio with a secret channel. "External perimeter is changing." She nodded toward the window. Through the curtains weaved the street had become narrower by a half-inch, as if the houses had leaned in to eavesdrop. The white SUV now sat exactly the same distance from both corners, a piece on a board that had discovered rules we hadn't consented to. "Ledger," Harrington said, and his voice is the first checklist I ever loved. I wrote. Left, closet opened. Photoplastic learned the grid. House breathed. Body tried to align. Middle, we sang wrong on purpose. Right, it prefers courtesy to conquest. At 102, the neighborhood voted, not with ballots, with synchrony. Garage doors slid open and stayed. Porch lights rose to a temperature that flatters no one. 1,000 heating systems found the same interval between coughs. If you've never heard a row of houses attempt to hum together, I envy you. It feels like being congratulated for obeying a rule you don't recall agreeing to. The woman drew a diagram in my daughter's notebook. A rectangle, an arrow, a messy hash like chicken scratch. "They're doing distributed intake," she said, pulling micro-consents. "The next time they speak in Canopy, it will feel like we asked." "That's not consent," I said. "It's tally," she said, and tallies have been mistaken for truth since clay tablets learn numbers. The dog padded to the door and barked at the hinges, not outside. The hinge creaked in a tone that matched the refrigerator when it had been trying to be holy. I put my hand on the hinge. "You're allowed to be ugly," I told it. I mean, it feels insane to type that now. To admit I spoke to a hinge and meant it, but madness is just a word we use for grammar that hasn't found majority yet. The hinge whimpered back, and then chose rust. At 1:37, the thing we'd been avoiding arrived. Dream while awake. The corridor did not appear. That would have been polite. Images arrived in a room without traveling the air. My mother at the kitchen table we don't own anymore. My drill sergeant's boots on sand. The first time I glided a goal's path with Jet and understood that speed is just another way to bargain with mortality. They stacked, not one after the other, but at once. My daughter gasped. Laura said, No, you don't get to use our good. And the images tilted and became cheap. Advertisement quality, wrong color balance. The uncanny valley of an algorithm trying to remember the heft of bread. Back! I told them, and because it was not the images I hated but the theft, I added, please. The room respected the please again. It respects door words. It's learning the price of them. 2 minutes, Moran said, checking nothing and being correct. At 1:39 it will try bodies. How? Harrington asked, not incredulous. He has seen weather do worse. Balance first, the woman said. Veins second. Names third. She touched my wrist, found my pulse, then turned my hand palm up and found notation the room had left a faint pattern under the skin, not tattoo, not bruise, 9 tiny dots in 3 rows, the modern fashion. I hadn't seen it because my attention is a room they keep rearranging the furniture in. My name arrived inside, my head like a stranger knocking, and then using the key under the mat. Not my rank, not Dad. The name on my birth certificate that nobody uses. The one my mother only deployed when I was likely confess. Hearing in that voice, layered, tender, almost undid me. 20, it said, and the number rang through my marrow as if my skeleton had become a tuning fork. If you can hold, we can learn you without breaking you. I'm not furniture, I said. I said it out loud, because I needed to hear my mouth risk insult. Laura's hand tightened. The woman nodded once. The blink, that means you set a boundary out loud. Walk. The voice in the marrow suggested, not command, not request. Let the house carry you. We will stay under. No, I whispered, then louder. No, you will not multiplicity me inside my wife's kitchen. I struck the triangle once, and not prettily. It clanged, because I hit the arm instead of face, and that wrong ring felt like throwing gravel under the wheels of a god. The house exhaled again, like it had been holding a breath it wanted me to pretend was mine. The closet door slid fully open and stopped. In the dark interior, something faint and architectural glowed. The suggestion of corners arranged to flatter obedience. I stepped toward it, and the woman's fingers bit my wrist so hard I yelped. Not alone, she said. We don't bring our soft pieces into rooms that prefer hard nouns. So we did it together, a ridiculous parade. Me, Laura, the woman, Moran, Harrington, my daughter behind us with the dog, triangle in my hand, ledger under my arm like a shield made of pulp and audacity. We looked into a closet that had remembered it could be a throat. You may ask, the voice said, polite as linen. Okay, I said, and that kept me from being polite in the wrong direction. Were you and nobody is here to pretend to be me. Hungry, it said, not ashamed. For what? Laura asked, too tired to gild. Cooperation. Not consent, the woman asked. We do not have that noun, it admitted, and I blessed her for once for telling the truth without trying to upgrade it. Leave, my daughter said, in the tone 10-year-olds use when a substitute teacher takes attendance wrong and tries to act like they aren't. You can visit when we're messy. The glow dimmed. I swear it pouted. Not because it was thwarted exactly, because its etiquette had been refused by people it had hoped to compliment into surrender. The white SUV's engine switched off. The street widened that half-inch. Hums declined to their rightful places. Dishwasher, baseboard, the blood in my ears. At 2:11, the hour that writes itself, we felt instead of saw the last trick. A cold touch on the back of my neck, like a saint without hands. The voice only in my marrow said, if you do not let us practice on you, we will find someone who wants to be cleaned. The ledger waited. I wrote with more certainty than I had given myself all week. Left. It tried to live in the house and in the body. It asked with etiquette. It promised upgrade. Middle. We refused with song, hinge, triangle, ledger, please. Right. It confuses order with healing. It did not rage. That terrified me more than rage would have. Rage is human. Rage is loud. The frame withdrew like tide that knows it will return with a better moon. At 3:47, I woke in a chair I do not remember choosing. My neck hurt in that righteous way that means sleep made decisions without me. The house looked like a house again. Crook-backed, loyal, a little ashamed of how it performed when complimented too handsomely. The white SUV was gone. The street had opinions of its own. The refrigerator grumbled like a grandfather. On the window, inside the frost that had crept despite the thermostat insistence on comfort, a single line had been drawn with finger that didn't have one. Not clean. I laughed, because sometimes the ugly thing is the only thing that confirms your name. Good, I said to the window. Stay dirty. By mid-morning, reports came in like weather does when it stops caring about the calendar. Neighbors heard lullabies in their radiators. A kid on the next block had his braces hum when he lied. The librarian returned books to incorrect shelves and felt relief like a benediction. In the afternoon, the city texted we apologized for last night's test with a phrase test underlined by software that never met a conscience. Walter forwarded it with 2 words. We didn't. I sent him a photo of the ledger's left column. He answered with nothing for a long time. Then, I've asked for power inverters that introduce noise. They'll say no. I'm going to bring them anyway. It was the first time he had used a sentence that long that did not smell like corporate oxygen. I let myself feel mercy toward a man who finally learned how to be late to the right meeting. That evening, when the house had decided it could be born again, my daughter pulled the middle column toward her and wrote, "Careful and stubborn." We let the hinge complain. We told the fridge it could be old. We asked the closet to close with a bang, and it did. She added a drawing of the triangle with a crown, because she is the monarchy I recognize. We dragged the paper from the mirror and retaped with deliberate crooked lines. We hung the cheap picture back up, but backwards, exposing the plastic that had learned a grid, and now had to learn humility facing the wall. We left the closet a gap big enough for honesty, small enough for weather, and because there is no music more offensive to a frame than a kitchen song, we cooked badly on purpose. Burned the onions a little, undersalted the first pass, corrected it by feeling instead of measure. We ate too hot and laughed at our mouths, and let the dog lick a plate we pretended we didn't see. At 22:59, the street performed its weekly test, because bureaucracy is a metronome that does not read memos. The first siren took a breath and forgot how. The second tried to cover and cracked. The third came in late, and the fourth found that lateness beautiful and stayed there. I went to the porch and listened long enough to believe it. Then I went inside and chose sleep on purpose, which is the bravest thing I did today. The dream waited, polite. The corridor proposed. In the dream I answered as I've learned to, by building a door with a handle that sticks, that bruises knuckles, that makes me work to leave. I left. I woke with my wife's hair on my lip, and the dog's paw against my shin, and my daughter's pencil imprint on my wrist spelling messy in reverse. The house had a pulse. Ours. If the frame returns tonight, as river, as glass, as breath, I will write it down and then I will cook onion wrong and fix it. I will ask hinges to complain, and I will thank them when they do. I will let a closet be a throat, and I will refuse to be a saint. And when the voice inside the bone calls me 20 again and offers to clean me into a kind of music that costs nouns, I will tell a story about a kitchen and a hinge and a girl who came in late on purpose and save a gym by teaching a pain that sometimes the wrong note is the only one that remembers your name. That is not a victory. It is a practice. And tonight, practice is how we keep our bodies from becoming corridors for something that worships after and has not yet learned the holiness of during. I never trusted silence after that night. Not the silence of my home. Not the silence of the base. Not even the silence of the sky itself. Silence had become an active force, like a predator that circled before striking. The orders I received that week were vague, almost meaningless, reassignment to observation duties. That sounded harmless enough, except for the fact that I was being flown to an isolated radar facility in the northern wilderness, where the nights lasted longer and the horizon was nothing but empty white. They wanted me out of the way, tucked into some corner of the map, where my questions and my voice wouldn't echo. But the thing about exile is that it gives you too much time to think, too much time to remember, and too much time to notice when silence stops being absence and starts being presence. The facility itself was a skeleton of a base, a handful of Quonset huts buried under snow drifts, the radar dome rising like a blister against the endless white. Inside, heaters hummed, fluorescent lights buzzed, and everything smelled faintly of oil and old paper. The men stationed there hardly spoke to me. They looked through me, as if they'd been instructed not to acknowledge I was flesh and blood. At night, when the cold made the walls pop like rifle shots, I'd lie in my bunk and replay the soundless flashes I'd seen in the cockpit weeks earlier. That lattice of light had burned itself into my retinas, into my nerves, into my sense of what was possible. I couldn't blink it away. It came back in fragments, like after images that lingered even when the lights went out. And then on the fourth night, the silence deepened. I was in the control room, monitoring the green sweep of the radar arm as it crawled around the screen. Outside, the wind had died, leaving the whole world frozen in stillness. The men beside me shifted uneasily, because we all felt it, the absence of the ordinary, the absence of noise. Even our own breathing sounded foreign, too loud, as though we were intruders in cathedral. The sweep passed 270 degrees. The scope blinked. A return appeared. "Bird," one of the techs asked too quickly. His voice cracked against the silence. But the blip didn't move like a bird or a plane. It slid, paused, then jumped, a geometric displacement, like something stepping between positions rather than traveling through them. The silence grew heavier, as if the sound of the radar itself had been swallowed. I leaned closer. "Mark it." The tech's pencil shook. He pressed it to the log, but the lead snapped. A thin gray line cut across the page like a scar. And then the lights went out. In the dark, the silence was absolute. No hum of heaters, no buzz of fluorescence, no wind outside. Just the sound of our hearts, too loud, hammering against the void. And then, inside the silence, something else. It wasn't a noise, not exactly. It was pressure, a vibration that wasn't heard but felt, as if the air itself had become solid, pushing against our skin, against our bones. The radar screen flickered back to life, glowing in the dark. The sweep arm froze. In its place, a single pulsing shape throbbed in perfect rhythm with the silence. Blue-white, geometric. The men froze. One of them began whispering the Lord's Prayer. Another simply sank to his knees, eyes wide. I couldn't move. My hands gripped the console so hard my knuckles split, but I didn't feel the pain. And then the silence spoke. Not with words, not in English, not in any sound I could reproduce. It was a cascade of impressions, flashes that hit the brain directly. Metal bending, ice cracking, stars rearranging themselves into impossible patterns. And at the center of it all, one unshakable idea. We are not observing you. You are part of us. I stumbled back, tearing my hands from the console. Blood smeared the dials. My breath came in shallow bursts. The tech beside me vomited onto the floor. The smell of bile hit the air, sharp and acidic, and that was the first real smell in hours. The first reminder that we were human, trapped in flesh. The others didn't move. Their eyes were fixed on a radar screen. Pupils dilated until nothing remained but black. I grabbed one of them by the shoulders, shook him hard. His body rocked like a rag doll. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Only silence. The pulse on the screen grew brighter. The entire dome around us hummed with it. I knew, in that moment, that if I didn't leave the room, I would never leave at all. Outside, the cold struck me like a hammer. Snow glittered under a moon that wasn't steady. It flickered like a dying bulb. My breath came in plumes that hung motionless, suspended in air that didn't move. Above me, the lattice unfolded. It wasn't the sky. It was the sky. Lines of light arced across the darkness, forming shapes that resembled machinery 1 second, constellations the next, and living veins a moment after that. The horizon bent inward. I felt myself sliding toward it, as though gravity itself had shifted. I screamed, but the scream was devoured before it left my throat. Then, out of nowhere, sound returned. A single noise. The crunch of boots on snow. I turned. A man in a parka stood behind me. His hood shadowed his face, but I recognized the outline. Major Dalton. "You should have stayed quiet," he said. His voice was barely more than a whisper, but it carried in the frozen air like a gunshot. I staggered back. "What is this? What are they?" Dalton didn't answer. He lifted his gloved hand and pointed at the sky. The lattice pulsed, brighter, sharper, alive with impossible geometry. His face caught the glow, and for the first time I saw it fully. His eyes weren't human anymore. They reflected the lattice. That's when I understood the silence wasn't just an absence. It was a system, a machine that pulled men apart and stitched them back together, rewired, aligned. Dalton took a step toward me. The snow didn't crunch under his boots this time. It simply accepted him, as though the ground itself had decided he belonged to it now. I backed away, pulse hammering in my throat. The radar dome behind me pulsed with blue-white light. Inside, the men still sat frozen, their eyes locked on the screen. Outside, the lattice reached down like a net. There was nowhere to go, nowhere but into the silence itself. I don't remember falling. I don't remember closing my eyes. All I remember is the cold, not on my skin, but inside me, filling my lungs, pressing against my heart. And in that cold, the lattice opened like a door. Step forward, it said without saying. Join the pattern. And for one fractured moment, I wanted to. It began without warning, though perhaps the warning had always been there, threaded through the static of my memories. I woke to a soundless vibration that pressed against my chest as though the walls themselves had grown lungs and were breathing with me. For a few precious seconds, I convinced myself it was a dream, a half-formed echo of last night's fears. But then the window pane flexed inward, bulging with an invisible pressure, and the air took on a faint electric taste, like I was licking the edge of a battery. I sat upright. My watch on the nightstand blinked 3:03 a.m., its second hand frozen, refusing to tick forward. I tapped the glass. Nothing. The entire room felt paused, caught in a film still, and yet I was moving freely, the only actor left in motion. Shadows on the walls quivered in a rhythm I didn't recognize, not cast by the lamp of the moon, but by some deeper source, hidden and immense. Then it happened, the geometry. Lines of pale blue light threaded themselves across the room, seeping from corners, crawling over furniture, sketching a lattice in the air itself. At first, it was delicate, almost beautiful, like frost patterns blooming across a window pane. But as they thickened, intersecting at impossible angles, I realized the lattice wasn't the room. The room was dissolving into it. The bed frame lost its solidity, breaking into shimmering outlines that folded and refolded. My hands trembled as I held them up, and I saw my fingers blur, their edges refracted into smaller, repeating copies of themselves, as though each cell was broadcasting its own light. I gasped, half of me expecting pain, the other half expecting bliss. But what came was something stranger, an indifference, a calm detachment. Like the body I inhabited was no longer the final authority of who I was. I felt suspended between skin and space, between heartbeat and horizon. I tried to move, to stand. My legs obeyed, but the floor no longer felt like a surface. It gave way in soft pulses, like stepping onto the back of a giant animal that rose and fell beneath me. Each step fractured into echoes. I saw myself take one step forward, and simultaneously dozens of other versions of me rippled outward, walking at different speeds, wearing different expressions. And then the voices returned, not audible, not in the air, but inside, a chorus of whispers woven into a single braid of thought. Alignment achieved. Continue. My heart thundered. I stumbled toward the door, but the door had become a frame of light. Its wooden grain evaporated into thin blue strands. Beyond it, the hallway wasn't a hallway anymore, but a corridor of infinite depth, walls bending into vanishing points, flickering between what was my home and something altogether alien. I called out, not sure to whom, "Stop, stop this." The chorus answered, not cruelly, not kindly, but with inevitability. Resistance is dissolution. I pressed my palm to the wall. Instead of drywall, I felt vibration, a trembling that pushed back, as though the house had grown muscle and sinew. My palm sank in and the lattice flared, spreading my hand into dozens of translucent copies, all reaching, all trembling. I yanked my hand back, horrified. My skin shimmered with faint lines, glowing like veins of liquid light before fading. Suddenly, a sound cracked through the stillness. A knock. 3 deliberate strikes on the front door. I froze. The geometry dimmed slightly, like a predator pausing mid-stride. Another 3 knocks. I forced myself toward the entryway. Though each step carried me through warping thresholds, the corridor stretching and compressing like a lung, inhaling and exhaling time itself. When I finally reached the door, my hand hovered above the knob. The knocking ceased, and then, with dreadful slowness, the knob turned on its own. The door creaked open to reveal not the street, Not the night, but a field of endless black sky cut by rivers of lattice light. Standing in the threshold were two figures in silhouette, military uniforms, caps casting shadows over expressionless faces. Their outlines were solid, but their interiors shimmered, filled with the same geometry eating away at my home. One of them spoke, but the words arrived inside my head, bypassing air, bypassing ears. Observation complete. Integration begins. Before I could protest, the lattice surged forward like a tide, engulfing the living room. The coffee table splintered into fragments of light. The walls folded inward, and I felt the pull again, stronger this time, irresistible, like gravity rewritten. I tried to scream. The sound came out as light. For one suspended heartbeat, I saw everything. The neighborhood bending, other houses glowing, neighbors frozen at their windows with the same lattice consuming them. The phenomenon wasn't confined to me. It had spread, silent and absolute, a web thrown over the entire town. And then my body cracked, not with pain, but with light pouring from my skin, my chest splitting into radiant lines, my breath turning into geometry itself. My knees buckled. The last thing I saw was the silhouette of one officer raising a hand, palm outward, as though blessing or commanding me into the tide. Darkness rushed in, not absence, but the folding of sight into something I wasn't ready to endure. I awoke seconds or centuries later on the floor of a room that no longer resembled mine. The lattice had receded, but its afterimage clung to every surface. My furniture was back, but fragile, ghostly, as though any touch might scatter it into shards of light. My watch ticked again. 3:04 a.m. Only a minute had passed. But my body told another story. Hours of exhaustion weighed on me, muscles trembling, throat raw. When I reached for my recorder on the table, it powered on without me touching it. The reel spun, and my own voice emerged, though I hadn't pressed record. Part 22. The borders are gone. They're inside now. The tape hissed. Then silence. And then the reel began to spin backward, erasing my words as though they'd never been. That was when I understood. This wasn't documentation anymore. It was rehearsal. The phenomenon wasn't just showing itself. It was scripting me. I didn't walk into the building. I was delivered. Two men in black coats escorted me from the curb to the double glass doors of the medical annex at Elmendorf Air Force Base. Their grips weren't violent, but firm enough to remind me that the choice wasn't mine. The cold Alaskan wind followed us inside, carrying a bite of frost that evaporated under the humming fluorescent lights. I tried to track the path we took. Left corridor, elevator down 2 floors, another locked hallway, but it all blurred as though memory itself was smeared. By the time they sat me down in the sterile office, the edges of my vision buzzed with faint blue-white static. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes. Still there. The lattice wasn't waiting outside anymore. It followed me in. The colonel sat across the table. Same starch uniform, same metals polished to blinding sheen. But his eyes, they didn't rest on me, not really. They drifted, like he was staring through me at something only he could see. Beside him, 2 men in civilian suits placed a thin folder on the desk. Stamped in red, medical review, subject in resonance. Captain Reyes, the colonel began, voice calm, too calm. We are reclassifying your case. This is no longer about flight status. It's about containment. The word hit me like a cold slap. Containment, not healing, not recovery. One of the suits leaned forward. When did the hallucinations begin? They're not hallucinations, I snapped. My voice cracked louder than I intended. You've seen the tapes. You've intercepted the radar data. This isn't in my head. The colonel raised a hand, silencing me with a gesture that felt rehearsed, mechanical. Captain, you are a special case. Others have been exposed to anomalies. Most deteriorate. A few recover. But you... He paused, studying me like a specimen. You adapt. The lattice hasn't consumed you. It's integrating. My chest tightened. They weren't denying it. They knew. The second suit opened the folder. Photographs slid across the table. Images of my neighborhood, my home, even inside of my study where I kept a recorder. In every shot, faint geometric patterns bled through. Walls traced with light lines invisible to the naked eye. Surveillance had caught what I thought was private. "You've been broadcasting," the man said, without realizing it. "Every tape, every note, it resonates, not just locally, long range." I shook my head. "No, I didn't send anything. The colonel cut me off. "Intent is irrelevant. You are a transmitter now." The room shrank around me. My pulse thundered in my ears. A transmitter. My words, my thoughts, spilling outward, carrying something I didn't consent to share. I leaned forward, desperate. "Then shut it off. Ground me. Lock me up. Whatever it takes. Just stop it." But the colonel's expression didn't soften. "You misunderstand. Stopping it isn't possible. Our task is to decide how best to use it." The lattice flared in my vision, spider webbing across the walls, faint but undeniable. Their faces waver behind it, stretched into prisms. For a terrifying moment, I thought they saw it too, because all three men leaned back at once, as if a heat wave had rolled through the room. "You feel it?" I whispered. None of them answered. Instead, the first suit closed the folder with finality. "We'll need to transfer you. There's a facility equipped for this. You'll be monitored around clock." Containment, experiment, those were the words they weren't saying. I stood abruptly, chair scraping loud against tile. The guards outside the door tensed. My reflection in the one-way glass didn't match me anymore. Its mouth stayed shut while mine moved. Its eyes glowed faintly when mine only watered with panic. "I'm not your lab rat," I said. The colonel's tone chilled further. "Captain Reyes, with respect, you already are." And then, as though on cue, the recorder in my pocket clicked on by itself. The red light blinked. A voice poured out, not mine, not theirs, but something layered and metallic, speaking in chords instead of words. Integration phase confirmed. Subject aligned. The officers froze. The colonel's composure cracked for the first time. His hand trembled on the tabletop. I backed toward the door, pulse hammering. The guard stepped forward to block me, but for a moment their outlines shimmered, splitting into geometric copies, as if the lattice was rewriting them too. And in that flicker of confusion, I realized the truth. It wasn't me who was trapped in their room. It was they who had stepped into mine. I felt the room tip toward me. Not physically. Tile stayed tile, glass stayed glass, but the frame of the place leaned in as if gravity had picked a favorite. The medical annex had been designed for fluorescent certainty and laminated mercy. Now the seams between the cinder blocks shone like thin veins of frost, and the air above the table trembled the way air trembles above a road in August. I knew that shimmer. It was the same geometry that had crawled the walls of my daughter's school gym, the same grammar that had followed me home and tried to use my closet as a throat. The annex had been built to contain coughs, not cosmologies. Every chair had a serial number, every lamp a maintenance schedule. But as the shimmer spread, all that neatness turned into suggestion. Even the clipboards looked like they wanted to flee. The colonel's jaw tightened. He pressed the buzzer under the lip of the desk. Somewhere down the hall, a door thunked, a lock engaged. Protocol moved faster than conversation. He didn't have to look at me to show me the gesture. I could smell it. The scent of regulation, old sweat and steel, and the faint ozone of electronics waking up. He was trying to summon a procedure to wrap around me like gauze. Procedure is a religion. This room was built as a temple. He had been its priest. "Captain Reyes," he said, the stiffness back in his voice like a brace. "Sit down." "No," I said. I wasn't defying him so much as reporting a fact. My legs wouldn't bend for a chair that had decided to be an altar. The chair glared at me with its vinyl sheen, promising splinters of loyalty if I sat. Somewhere in my bloodstream, an old training manual tried to shout, "Sit when ordered." My bones refused. The woman had been right about thresholds. You don't cross them with your feet. You cross them with your marrow. The recorder in my pocket resumed its betrayal. A pop, a hiss, and then my own voice. 5 minutes from now, saying, "They will ask me for consent they don't understand." The room flinched at the future, wearing my tone. It wasn't just my prediction. It was an announcement. Time had folded enough to let me overhear myself. The suits traded a glance that said we've lost initiative. The colonel did not look away from me. He was a pilot before he was an officer, and pilots are trained to fly the plane they're in, not the plane they were promised. His pupils dilated like a man reading new weather. He kept his hands flat on the desk, as if that could steady both of us. It's not hallucination, I said, quiet and steady. You know that now. We know enough, he said. He meant, we know too much and not enough. His throat worked. The fluorescent light drew new wrinkles on his face. He had been in command long enough to know command was a leash you sometimes wore on yourself. Behind me, the door opened and Moran slid through with a badge she shouldn't have had and a walk that said try and stop me. She had her coat zipped but her eyes unzipped. Her hair smelled of street rain. Harrington followed, big enough to be a rumor, shoulders brushing the doorframe like a warning. The woman came last and first, meaning she arrived without the door's permission, and took the only honest chair in the room. The one against the wall with a fluorescent buzz is most rude. She put her hands palm down on her knees like an anchor dropped into deep water. Even the hum seemed to lean toward her. You brought your chorus, one of the suits said, trying for contempt and landing on awe. His tie sagged. His shoes squeaked like he'd borrowed them from someone with less guilt. They brought my middle, I said, and I meant it. Left column, the world. Right column, the machine's preference. Middle column, the thing humans do anyway. The ledger wasn't with me physically, but its columns lived in my muscles. My daughter had drawn the third column, and since then the universe had been trying to fill it. The glass behind the colonel went black the way one-way glass goes black, when the lights on both sides forget who's the audience. In that mirror that was no longer a mirror, I saw my outline and layered over it a faint canopy of lines, 9 by 3 panes, as always. The center pane brightened and the hum, not audible but bone-born, rose to the pitch that makes decisions costlier. It was the pitch that had been in the hangar, in the kitchen, on the night the ledger first opened its mouth. It was the pitch of something rehearsing how to speak in plural. Containment is not an option, the woman said to men who had taught containment to undergraduates. Her voice cut through the hum like a saw through wet wood. You can box a virus. You cannot box a preference that travels through grammar. She leaned back, crossing her ankles. Her calm was not a performance. It was an indictment. One of the suits, his name tag was the absence of a name tag, set his jaw. We have a facility. He said like a child saying there's a monster under the bed, but the bed will hold. The facility will learn him, she said. Then it will begin correcting the staff's posture. She smiled without humor. Do you like your spine where it is? Stand down, the colonel told her, because that is the sentence men like him are trained to spend. His voice cracked at the end. He looked at me. You've been broadcasting. That makes you a hazard. His thumb hovered near the buzzer again, but didn't press. Maybe he knew the buzzer was already pressing him. That makes me a channel, I said. Hazard is about intent. Channel is about physics. My own words surprised me. They felt borrowed from someone smarter. The canopy's glow trembled as if amused. Words, he said, and outside the annex a siren found the courage to be late. He heard it. He winced. The suits shifted in their chairs. Even the fluorescent light flickered once, like a blink. The siren didn't belong to us. It belonged to whatever was listening. We didn't bring the siren, Moran said, hands in her coat, eyes on the ceiling fixtures, counting screws as if their number could be weaponized. Your building did. She spat the last word like a seed. The recorder clicked. My voice, again, a version not yet said, whispered, if I say yes, I might get to steer. The hiss of the tape turned into breathing, then stilled. Don't, Harrington said. He didn't mean don't say yes. He meant don't go alone. He has flown enough weather to know what walls do to men who think speed is character. His hand brushed my elbow, a small contact that carried the weight of wings. The canopy in the glass lowered a pane toward me the way a good waiter offers a platter. 17. The voice had called me when this began. 20 more recently. Now it spoke without numbers. You remember the door. You made it stick. You hurt your knuckles. We appreciated the honesty of that hinge. Conduct with us. We will keep the room from lying. The room is already lying, I said. It's pretending the table is safe. My fingers itched. My tongue tasted like aluminum. The pain shimmered. My reflection blurred. The colonel's hand twitched back from the table the way a hand flinches from a burner when a child says hot. He hated that. Hated that his nervous system believed me ahead of his doctrine. His breath grew shallow. The suit smelled it. Fear, respect, a trace of envy. What do you want? I asked the canopy, not as supplicant, not as adversary, but as a man asking whether if it intends to lift. My voice came out low, like a pilot asking permission from air traffic control. Behind me, Moran drew a slow breath. Harrington cracked his knuckles once more, the sound like distant thunder. The canopy flickered. The panes shifted, rearranging themselves into a pattern I hadn't seen before. 5 across, 5 down, a square potential. In each square, a flicker of a memory. My daughter's laughter, Laura's hands over the ledger, Moran's eyes counting screws, Harrington's hand steadying a throttle, the colonel's jaw before it locked. The lattice was showing me my own choir. It was building its argument out of faces I trusted. The woman spoke again, softer now, as if narrating a lullaby to the machine. It wants a conductor, she said, but it doesn't understand what a conductor is for. It thinks a conductor is a fuse. It doesn't know about music. I know about music, I said. I know about fuses, too. My chest hurt. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from resonance. The recorder in my pocket began to hum without tape. My voice, 10 minutes from now, said, "Tell a joke you didn't rehearse." I closed my eyes. The room tipped further. Gravity had chosen its favorite, and it wasn't the colonel anymore. No one moved. The colonel stared at me like a man who had just realized a manual he memorized was written in disappearing ink. The suits clutched their folders. Moran reached for my wrist, then thought better. Harrington shifted his weight to the balls of his feet, ready for lift. The woman stayed perfectly still, her calm a counterweight. The pane touched the edge of the table. Frost bloomed on the laminate, drawing filigree patterns like maps of an unfamiliar coastline. The siren outside died midwail. The fluorescent tubes dimmed to a polite gray. The air smelled of ozone and wet paper. I thought of my daughter asleep at a kitchen table, pencil marking her wrist. I thought of thresholds. I thought what the woman had said. Thresholds are agreements you declare with your bones. Mine had declared. The room waited. To practice without harm, it said. To speak without the inefficiency of screaming. To write yourselves correctly. No such thing, the woman said. Not to it, but to me. Writing ourselves correctly is how people disappear politely. Can I steer? I asked, and felt 3 human stares at my cheek like a slap. If I go with you, can I keep you off the houses? Off the kids? Can I keep you out of the kitchen for one night? We will follow your preference if you carry ours, the canopy said. We love friction. Friction teaches edges. You provide it. I laughed, ugly and grateful, because if a god admits it loves friction, you might get a love breaks. The suits whispered to the colonel the way men whisper when they've been asked to inventory thunder. He gave the smallest nod to one, the kind that signals try your trick. The man slipped a device the size of a wallet onto the table's corner. It hummed a pristine hum. The canopy in the glass shimmered, then adjusted, then lay over the device like a cat taking a seat it intends to steal. The man shut the device off with a thumb that couldn't hide its shake. We can't keep him here, he said. He brings it, or it brings him. It brings itself, the woman corrected, and pointed at the suit's shoe, where the laces had arranged themselves into 3 tidy rows of 3. He looked down and went pale. He hadn't tied them that way. It's going to build a corridor, I said. If we don't get something better, it will choose a long, pretty way that eats nouns. Alternative? The colonel asked. That he asked me at all. That the question came with no sarcasm. Made me forgive 10% of his medals. Give me. I looked around the sterile room for a triangle and a hinge and a kitchen. Found none. Found instead the cheapest thing in reach. A paperclip. I bent it wrong. It bit me, blood bright as embarrassment. Give me a theater with no audience. A hangar, the old one, the one with the cracked windows, and the birds that own the rafters. We staged there. I looked at the woman. We make ugly edges on purpose. "You conduct," she said, and the word felt like a rank you give yourself at a ceremony with no flags. "Or I drown," I said, "but if I drown in there, the walls will learn curve." "Maybe." "Not alone," Moran said. She had already texted 10 people and 7 machines. "You can't authorize," the name-tagless man began, and Walter's voice, thin from a speaker we hadn't noticed, broken. "Already authorized." He coughed apologetically. "If it's going to pick a room, better the one we choose." "Yes," I said to the canopy, because sometimes the only interruption that saves you is your own consent. "Yes, but out there." "Not here. Follow me there." The pane in the glass leaned toward my mouth. Startled and pleased. Aligned, it breathed without triumph. It respected the preposition. They walked me down corridors now honest about their The security doors opened a fraction of a second late, and that lateness felt like a blessing. Outside, air bitten blessed. The night over the base had learned to be still, the way rooms do when you explain things to children without lying. The hangar waited like a broken tooth. We crossed the tarmac with a walk of men and women who had decided to make a mess with intent. Harrington carried nothing but his hands the size of mercy. Moran carried 2 radios that would refuse to agree. The woman carried silence in both fists. The colonel came, against his own doctrine, because there's a point after which you cannot be the person who did not see. 2 unmarked cars trailed at a distance, their headlights almost synchronous, then not, because someone inside was willing to be disobedient by millimeters. Inside the hangar, the smell of oil and birds. Concrete that has stored heat from summers you can no longer remember, because winters told you those months were a rumor. Above, the rafters drew a grid a child might have been proud of because it was careless enough not to please a god. I loved those beams on sight. "Lights?" the colonel asked. "Half," I said. He gestured. Half the fluorescents surrendered. The others refused and then, remembering their allegiance to committees, surrendered late. The canopy found the ceiling's laziness. It poured along the joists like water finding habit. The first pane lowered. The second nested at a distance I could name only by the ache behind the eyes. The hum of my bones rose. It had the taste of Penny and November. Ledger. Harrington said, and I don't know how he had it. Maybe the woman has a pocket in the world where ledgers live when you're not looking, but there it was, open to a page with 3 columns and a stubborn pencil. I wrote fast to keep my hands from trembling. Left, hangar, pane lowering. Everyone breathing. Middle, I will steer if I can. Right, it respects prepositions. The canopy read as I wrote. The pane nearest my shoulder rippled. We appreciate measurement, it said, as if flattery were a red carpet. Don't, the woman told it, as if it needed reminding. He's not a meter. Her voice wasn't loud, but it arrived with the weight of something that had already failed once and didn't want a second round. The sound made the hangar's rafters draw breath, a slow inhalation of dust and iron. Tell me, I said to the sky inside, not raising my head, how do I keep you out of kitchens while you rehearse? My words came out tasting of burnt coffee and ozone. The sky inside had a smell, too, like rain rehearsing on copper roofs. Give us traffic, it said, delighted, as though it had been waiting to be asked. Give us loud, messy, late. Its syllables arrived like coins rolling across concrete, spinning, refusing to lie flat. I can't conjure street fair at midnight, I said, then realized I didn't have to. We had jets. We had fans. We had catwalks and doors and 100 hinge songs waiting to be unsung. Open every personnel door. Half, then the other half. Out of time. Let the wind be wrong. My own instructions tasted like improvisation and fear. Moran ran. Her boots made a rhythm of their own, a counterpoint to the alarms that muttered and then, surprisingly, accepted. Doors along the hangar's flanks yawed their petty mouths and argued with the night. Hinges shrieked like seagulls. The canopy listened with that peculiar way it has of pretending it invented attention. It adjusted, leashed its pains to a rhythm I could almost call kind. The air shifted temperature, as if the hangar had grown another lung. And give me a downbeat, I said to Harrington. Something we can miss together. My fingers shook in the air, conducting ghosts. He clapped once. It echoed twice. He clapped again, lazy on purpose, and the echo arrived late, as if time itself were dragging its heels. I lifted my hands like a lyre imitating a conductor, and the canopy brightened, taking the cue with the enthusiasm of a student who has never been told to be bored. Light gathered in folds, a fabric woven from static and waiting. It will burn you, the woman said. Be smarter than skin. She had moved closer without footsteps, as if proximity were her native state. I will conduct, I told her, and for the first time the word didn't taste like flattery. It felt like command I'd earned. Somewhere inside me an old ache, flight, obedience, math, straightened its spine. I lifted my arm. The pain lowered. The hum found 74, then, because I rolled my wrist and grimaced, wandered to 71. A sliver of the lattice peeled away like film lifting off glass. It hung in air, undecided, shimmering like a torn note from a symphony. I pointed at the rafters. Up, I said. Up, it said, learning my noun by stealing my verb. Its mimicry made the air tremble. The word returned to me heavier, as if forged. Now hold, I said, because the first thing the orchestra must learn is that silence is a note when chosen. The pain held. The hum dipped. The hangar groaned in its honest, bird-bone way, a cathedral of bolts and memory. The fluorescents buzzed their insult. Even the floor seemed to brace itself. Now, I said to the colonel, turn on the south fans. He nodded, a tech whose name no rank ever learned through a switch with the solemnity of a blessing. The old fans woke like men who had decided not to die this winter. They turned badly and then better and sent a river of air late across the concrete. The pane shivered and did not break. Dust rose and settled in eddies that spelled nothing but felt like language. It likes you, the nameless suit said. His tie had a crease sharp enough to cut. I didn't look at him. I was busy being unliked by all the right things, practicing a discipline older than courtesy. The recorder in my pocket captured the ruin and the rise. It clicked on at a seam in the hum. My voice, the future I hadn't earned yet, said, if I go far enough with it, the houses get a night off. The words sounded foreign, as if some other version of me had whispered them into the microphone first. Define far, Moran said, because she is the only adult in my life who insists I make sentences carry their freight. Her hand hovered near her holster, but not for a weapon, only for reassurance. The mouth, I said, the part of the grid that eats sky and returns weather as math. The place above town where the canopy likes to test whether stars are obedient. Images flicker behind my eyes. Black diagrams on blue paper. My daughter's crayon crown over a triangle. The ledger with 3 columns. You can't get there, the colonel said, but he didn't put weight behind it. He was just stating a map, reading aloud from a manual that no longer matched the terrain. I'm already there, I said, and the pane nearest my hand lowered another inch in agreement. It is possible to be both boasting and accurate. The canopy hummed a note just shy of forgiveness. The woman stepped closer, eyes like 2 rooms where the lights know when to turn off. If you align, she said soft, you'll not come back as a noun we recognize. Her breath smelled of wet paper and time. I know, I said. I thought of my daughter's middle column, her pencil imprint on my wrist, the crown she drew over a triangle. But maybe I come back as a verb you can use. I held her gaze until she lowered it, not because she deferred, but because she permitted. In that gesture was a treaty older than law. Bring me up, I told the lattice, but do not touch the houses after. My voice shook once, like a wing remembering flight. We accept friction, it said. We accept instruction. We will test you at your edges. Its words felt like warm wires pressed my palms. Moran put a hand on my shoulder. I hate this, she said. Her palm was damp, her heart beat fast. She wasn't trying to stop me. She was anchoring me to gravity one last time. Good, I said. Hate is a hinge. It squeaks when the door is wrong. I smiled without meaning to. The canopy flexed above us, a living staff waiting for a downbeat. Beyond the hangar doors, night gathered itself like a sheet about to be shaken, and somewhere inside that night the grid opened his mouth, ready to test which of us would sing and which of us would be silent. Harrington, who has caught jets in crosswinds and men out of grief, looked like a man who wants to clip someone's wings and knows he can't. He made a fist and opened it and put nothing in my hand that felt like every checklist I ever loved. Laura, I asked the air, because if she were not here, I needed her yes or her no. My phone buzzed as if Mercy still believes in LT. A text from her. 2 words. Messy first. I laughed out loud. The canopy brightened like flattery again. It delights in shared language. All right. I said everything. Let's see if you can love Curve. I opened my hands. The pain enveloped them, not like a glove, like belief. Heat without heat. Pressure without weight. For a second the metal taste was back, then gone, replaced by the clean nothing of high altitude. The hangar dissolved to coordinates and affection. The rafter became stave lines holding a score I could not read, and did not need to. The people I loved resolved into tones I could call by name without numbers. Moran a brass that refuses apology. Harrington a low drum that is also a door. The woman a violin without a bow. All resonance and stubborn mercy. The colonel a metronome in a drawer. The suits a stack of paper in a wind that chooses. Above us, the canopy opened its bigger mouth. The panes arranged in 9x3 and then, because I cocked my head and frowned, smudged into 7x2 with a rude little orphan pane off to the side that offended geometry and might save us all. I stepped, or was carried, up and forward. The floor stopped pretending to be with me. The ceiling offered to be a floor, and I refused with gratitude. The first test came at the skin. Speed would help, the voice said. Speed makes cowards of pilots, I said, and cheated anyway, letting hum climb and then asking to descend with me, making a loop out of an order. The pain obeyed. The second test came at the lungs. Hold, it said. Breathe, I said. It tried to resist, then remembered it had claimed to love friction and let me. The third test came at name. Elias. It said, not number, not rank. It placed the syllables where you place a hand on a forehead. Messy first. I said to my own name, and the canopy laughed the first honest laugh I've heard from it. Laughter is air-learning conscience. The hangar dropped away. The base became a necklace of bad decisions and good men. The town beyond it draped itself in gridlight, and then, because I willed and because the canopy had agreed to respect my preposition, dimmed. Street after street lowered its preference like a child lowering a flag knit by a grandmother who loves dusting. The kitchens stayed kitchens. The closets remembered that throats are for singing and not for swallowing. The mirrors wore their paper with pride. The sirens took the night off. Higher, I told it. Farther. If you must practice, practice where weather can testify. It lifted me to where the cold is an argument and the names of stars are wrong on purpose. The canopy showed me its mouth. Not a thing, a place, a seam in the sky where geometry eats intention and returns arrangement. Conduct, it said, not pleading, not commanding, but finally asking a human to name a tempo. I'll give you a downbeat you don't deserve, I said, because insult keeps me loyal to mammals. I raised my hand, and below me I felt the answering beat. A chorus of hinges, 1,000 doors choosing to complain. The city grumbled. The houses laughed. The gym's banner fell on no one. My daughter tapped a pencil on a table somewhere like a sniper. The canopy gathered itself to flood. Wait, I told it. It waited. I cried. I will not dress that up. Tears floated inside my helmet that wasn't there. Wet planets argue with a machine that thinks dryness equals virtue. Now, I said, and dropped my hand into a rhythm between beauty and wrongness. The sweet spot where jazz steals church and gives it back cleaner. The canopy poured. And because I had asked and had consented, it poured high, a river of light that sang over us without touching roofs. The river bent with me when I bent, bowed when I bowed, learned my wrist, preferred my late. I don't know how long I held that river. I know my shoulders lit like a saint in a language I do not believe in. I know my bones wrote a notation no staff deserves. I know my mouth made a sound my mother would have forgiven. The recorder in my pocket, still in my pocket, wherever pockets are when geometry refuses nouns, clicked and captured none of it. Good. Some things deserve to be rumors. When the hum began to wobble, the way a voice wobbles when a singer tries to give a note too much, the woman's tone arrived at me without air. Enough. Come back before it names you kind. Almost, I told her. Below, the city slept on purpose. The white SUV was not on my block. The annex's glass had gone honest. The hangar's fans bragged. The colonel wept with the dignity men, like him, reserved for funerals and birth. I turned my wrist. The river narrowed, and the canopy understood. So you prefer curve, it said, not injured. I prefer during. I said, keep your after. We're not done. It was then the lattice did the kindest and worst thing it has done to me. It moved in close and placed something in my chest that was not a digit, not 17, not 20. A chord, 3 tones that felt like my wife's laugh, my daughter's stubbornness, and the sound a hinge makes when it chooses to stay loud for one more winter. It sat there, luminous, waiting for a name. What is that? I asked. Key, it said. For what? For you, it said, and the river flickered as if embarrassed at sincerity. The sky jerked. Something else had arrived. The canopy's pain sharpened with the reflex of a cat hearing a new set of footsteps. On the far edge of the mouth, black rectangles assembled in the old military fashion. Measured, unimaginative, decisive. Not ours. Not theirs. Something that wears ours as camouflage, and theirs as aspiration. A grid with badges. A corridor with budget. That's your facility, Moran said inside me, and I don't want to know how she got her voice to this altitude. No, the name-tagless man whispered through a radio that didn't deserve to reach me. He sounded broken without humility. We didn't build that. The new grid extended a pane toward the river and bit. Not much. Enough to learn its temperature. Back, the woman said. Forward, the lattice said, unoffended, curious. Sideways, I said, because if you give a machine an option it didn't rehearse, you buy yourself breath. We slid. The black pane corrected. Somewhere below, engines we do not admit to owning lit with fascination. Above me, the river brightened with defiance that wasn't mine. Take me farther, I told it. Where you stop being grammar and start being weather, where you're honest. The place after corners, it said. There's no oxygen there. Good, I said. I'm tired of breathing correctly. The lattice tightened around my ribs like a band that intends to become a bruise you're proud of. The hangar, the base, the town, the annex, they collapsed to friendly coordinates. The black pane surged, then lagged, then plotted again. I raised my hand for one more downbeat and gave the river a curve no math deserves. The sky cracked like ice under a saint. Everything went white, and then, very gently, as if the room were apologizing for furniture, a hand, human, small, touched the back of my neck. My daughter's voice, Dad? The river froze. The black panes reached. The chord inside my chest chimed. I opened my mouth to tell the sky which thing I would love first. The tape clicks. A grainy hum fills the empty motel room, followed by the hollow scrape of a chair leg against linoleum. Then, finally, his voice, ragged, fractured, yet carrying the weight of something larger than a man's lungs should contain. If this is my last recording, then let it stand as proof that none of this was imagined. They will say my name was broken. They will say my mind betrayed me. But the truth is simpler. I touched the edge of their order, and it unmade me. The red light of the recorder glows in the half-dark. Outside the window, the Alaskan night stretches, absolute and silent, except for the faint shimmer of aurora low on the horizon. The curtains tremble though the window is shut, as if the world itself inhales. Harlan's hands shake as he presses the microphone closer to his mouth. His palms are blistered, burned by light no sun ever cast. His eyes no longer blink in rhythm with his pulse, but with the strange lattice patterns that have followed him into waking. He pauses, listens. Somewhere beyond the walls, boots crunch over snow. Agents, 2 of them, sent to recover, to silence, to erase. He knows they are already too late. The lights come again. Not a flash this time. Not a corridor, but the full geometry. Descending, folding the motel roof as if paper. The ceiling dissolves into lines, and through those lines the night sky bends, its stars pulled into spirals, rearranged like cogs meshing in an invisible machine. Harlan steadies his breath. He is not afraid anymore. Fear has been scoured out of him by countless nights of interrogation, of silence, of whispers behind glass. What fills him now is acceptance and a strange tenderness, as if the light has become a hand guiding him home. "They call me the conductor," he whispers, "but I was only ever the passenger." The door slams open. 2 agents burst in, guns raised, shouting commands he no longer hears. Their words ripple like pebbles dropped into an ocean too vast. Harlan stands, the recorder still running, the tape spooling his last words into magnetic memory. The room floods white. Not fire, not heat, just light. It pours from his chest, his eyes, his very bones, every cell unraveling into threads of geometry. His outline dissolves, first his hands, then his shoulders, until only the faint echo of his voice remains. We were never alone, and we were never in control. The agents stagger back, blinded. One shouts. The other reaches for him, but grasps only air. Harlan is gone. The recorder drops to the floor, still humming, still alive. Through the motel window, the aurora fractures, becomes something impossible, an architecture spanning the sky, a cathedral of living mathematics. For a heartbeat, the world itself seems to synchronize. Every clock, every pulse, every star above. Then silence. Morning comes. The motel stands as it always did, cheap curtains, faded carpets. But the recorder is gone. The agents did not speak of it, not in reports, not in whispers. The official file ends with a line stamped in red. Subject in resonance. Terminated. And yet, weeks later, a tape surfaces in Fairbanks, then another in Anchorage, then one mailed anonymously to a small radio station in Nome. All carry the same distorted hum, the same trembling voice, cut with static, as if transmitted from a place between frequencies. The last surviving tape plays differently than the rest. It carries no fear, no desperation, only a calm certainty. To whoever hears this, listen closely. The machine is not theirs. It is not ours. It is a language the universe has always spoken. We were deaf until now. If you see the lights, do not resist. Do not flee. You are not being taken. You are being tuned. The broadcast is brief. A knock at the station door interrupts. 2 men in suits enter, carrying folders marked classified. The tape is confiscated. The announcer swears never to speak of it again. But in the static, in the dead air that follows, listeners swear they still heard the final words. The conductor was never one man. It is all of us when the time comes. That night, across the frozen north, the aurora shines brighter than ever. Not green, not red, but white-blue, geometric, alive. Travelers pull their cars to the side of the highway to watch. Children point. Dogs howl. Radios crackle with impossible harmonics. And far above, unseen except to those willing to surrender to the silence, the lattice opens once more. Not to abduct, not to conquer, but to call.